Thank you very much for the introduction. So I have to switch it on. Okay, I assume that the advances in artificial intelligence will lead to the formation of a new aesthetic discipline, which I would like to call AI aesthetics. After the foundation of philosophical aesthetics in the middle of the 18th century, several new aesthetic disciplines have emerged, such as empirical aesthetics, analytical aesthetics, evolutionary aesthetics, and neuroaesthetics. And there have been questions, traditional questions of philosophical aesthetics, like what is beauty and what is aesthetical judgment, and these questions have been reformulated with different methods. So in all this special aesthetics, there is a specific scientific method on the ground, and that's why you can answer these old philosophical questions in a new manner. So, but I think with AI aesthetics, it is different. AI aesthetic or AI is changing not only our understanding of art and music, but also the practice of art and music. I first introduced the term AI aesthetics in the book Aesthetic Experience, which has been published in 2016. And when I wrote the chapter, Aesthetic Experience and AI aesthetics, I could not Google the term and I could not find the term in the library or on a paper. And the chapter on AI aesthetics is part of an discourse analysis of the discourse of aesthetic experience in Germany. So in Germany we have had for 50 years a discourse on aesthetic experience. This discourse occurred as a critique of Adorno's aesthetic theory. And my argument is that AI aesthetics fundamentally questions the premise of this aesthetic discourse, because this discourse relies on the concept of aesthetics experience as suggested by Kant in his critique of judgment. And Kant defines the notion of the aesthetic judgment and of aesthetic experience by a negation, to the sphere of morality and to pure reason. And on the basis of such a notion of aesthetics experience, you cannot explain what you learn if you make an aesthetic experience. But AI aesthetics, on the other hand, implies a notion of aesthetics experience based on learning processes, in that AI today relies heavily on machine learning programs. That was my argument. The term AI aesthetics has two aspects. First of all, there is the technological aspect. It concerns the algorithm, the experiments and applications of artificial intelligence in art, fashion, design, popular music, and art music. And secondly, there is also a philosophical aspect. It concerns the interpretation of the AI phenomena, such as questions. So questions would be, what does it mean if art music is composed by an AI program? The phenomena, together with the reflection about the phenomena, are equally included in this idea of AI aesthetics. In the AI chapter, I refer to the article A Neural Algorithm of Artistic Style, which has been published in 2015. The essay describes an artificial neural network that can learn any artistic style of painting. In the first step, the artificial neural network is trained in a specific style of painting, and in this case, the training data are generated by Van Gogh's famous painting, The Starry Night. In the second step, you can choose any photo, like a portrait or a photo of a landscape, as a new content. And in the third step, this photo can be reproduced in the Van Gogh style. This neural algorithm of artistic style is thus able to separate content and form, and that was not at all obvious that a program can do that. Let me show the three images again in large format. Here you see Vincent van Gogh's The Starry Night from 1889. This is the new image content, the photo of the house facades on the river Neckar in Tübingen. So the research group was or is based in Tübingen. And that's the result, the house facades on the river Neckar in the Van Gogh style. However, this style transformation still has apparent weaknesses, in that the moon appears here in the same place as in the Starry Night by Van Gogh. Here you see the original painting and this painting, this rendering. But of course, and that means that the separation of content and style has not yet entirely completed, but such algorithms can be improved. Here you see a later program version, and you see that the moon is no longer recognizable as a style element. Here I switch between the two versions, and I think this version is more convincing. On the website DeepArt.io, you can use the AI algorithm to upload your own images and convert them into a new style. Incidentally, you can use any style templates, even templates such as a stone wall. Even moving pictures can be converted with this algorithm into any style of painting. Here is a short video sequence from the Cathedral Square in Freiburg in the aesthetic world of Van Gogh. The American composer David Cope, which you can see here in his studio, developed already 30 years ago the computer program EMI that can compose in any classical music style. EMI is, by the way, an acronym for Experiments in Musical Intelligence. To the surprise of many experts, EMI was already able to compose works in the style of Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven in the 1990s, which also deceived experts in blind tests. So they could not decide whether they listened to a virtual Mozart or to a real Mozart. Here you can hear a short clip from a Bach concerto created with EMI. In my book, The Digital Revolution of Music, a Music Philosophy, you can find a chapter, Virtual Music, about David Cope's life's work. Cope had still prepared the databases for his algorithms by hand. So, for example, he broke all the 371 chorals composed by Bach into beats by hand, and thus allowing the algorithm to generate new Bach chorals from these beat elements. Another weakness of EMI was that she could compose thousands of new compositions from which Cope has had to choose the most artistically valuable for the performance. So the quality judgment was made by a human. But in principle, Cope pioneered AI aesthetics before deep learning gave artificial intelligence a new boost in 2012. Today, Cope's manual work, so to break down the scores into beats, is done internally by deep learning systems. Here's an example of a Bach choral created with the program Deep Bach. You can feed a melody into the algorithm, much like you can feed a photo in the program Deep Art, and then the program will compose a Bach choral with this melody. My last music example is about IVA. IVA is an acronym for Artificial Intelligence virtual artist. It is a deep learning system that has been trained with over 30,000 scores of composers in the music history. It can compose sheet music with classical instruments and orchestra. One can define in advance 30 different parameters of the piece to be composed, parameters such as the compositional style, the epoch, the composer, the mood, or the orchestration, and so on. In 2017, the cultural minister of Luxembourg commissioned an orchestra piece from IVA, and a huge orchestra performed the piece with the very ambitious title, "Let's Make It Happen," at the National Day celebration in Luxembourg. The Luxembourg Federation of Authors and Composers complained bitterly and called the commission, quote, "an affront to Luxembourg's composers, a slap in the face of all creative people in the arts." The last music example leads to the second aspect of my talk, the philosophical or reflexive aspect of AI aesthetics. What are the consequences of all these AI programs for the theory and for the praxis of art and music? One consequence we have already seen: composers for contemporary classical music lose commissions to AI composers. In a first sketch, I would like to present to you 4 hypotheses on AI aesthetics, and I think it would be easy to formulate 10 or 15 such hypotheses, and that would be, for instance, suitable for a research program or for a book project. First, artificial intelligence can perfectly reproduce any artistic style. Of course, this proposition refers to already existing styles. In principle, the performance of artificial neural networks can be increased indefinitely. And that has 2 aspects. As computer performance increases every year, the networks can work with more layers. And the more layers you have, then better a deep learning system can learn. And the second aspect, that you can increase the performance of such a network with more training data. And in this respect, I do not see any limits to create artwork and compositions on the base of an artistic style. 2, a new artistic style can only be created with additional semantic information. Every new artistic style is based on a background philosophy. Pointillism, for instance, relied on the latest 19th century theory of perceptual physiology and the idea of additive color mixing. In order to create a genuinely new style, one needs concepts and ideas that underlie the style or the ism. Even with this wall style, you have to know that the President of the United States wants to build a wall in order to understand the joke. But this wall style is not a true artistic style, a true aesthetic style, because the wall itself has semantic meaning. In other words, the wall is a style template. In other words, the wall as a style template does not allow a real separation from content and style. And this remark is important because with AI aesthetics, anything and everything can be used as a style template, such as dog heads, for instance, and in this case, then dog heads appear everywhere in your picture. 3, the best artworks transcend their styles. Here you see the picture of George Braque, violin and jug. Traditional painting tried to represent an object in the 2-dimensional space of a canvas. Analytical cubism, in contrary, tried to overcome the idea of representation by blurring the distinction between the object and the space, and that's why it is difficult to discover the violin and the jug in this painting, because it is partially ambivalent what detail of the painting belongs to the object and what detail belongs to the space or to the background. The exceptional quality of this painting lies in a detail that is easily overlooked. As you can see here, the nail and the book corners stick out of the picture. One could say that these are the last remnants of the traditional conception of painting. Braque's painting is not just a manifestation of analytical cubism, but the picture also reflects its stylistic concept in contrast to traditional painting, a tradition that analytical cubism tries to overcome. And this self-reflection of the style is precisely what makes Violin and Jug an outstanding painting, in my opinion. You can find this analysis of Braque's painting in my book, Gehalt-Aesthetic, and I mentioned this book because the idea of gehalt-aesthetics is crucial for my last hypothesis on AI aesthetics. For AI aesthetics is pushing art and music into gehalt-aesthetics. The German word gehalt-aesthetic could be translated like content aesthetic, but I rather prefer not to. And content aesthetics reminds me too much of socialist realism when you have a defined meaning and message. So we have two words in German for content, that is Inhalt and Gehalt. And Gehalt is used usually in the philosophical tradition of Hegel and Adorno. It means it is a content of a poem or an artwork which must be interpreted. So you generate the Gehalt, the content, by an interpretation. And this meaning is important in the name Gehalt-aesthetics. The basic aesthetic value of the modern arts is not any longer beauty, like it was the case in the fine arts over centuries. The new aesthetic basic value of the modern arts is newness. That's why classical music is called new music at the beginning of the 20th century. In the epoch of classical modernism, new music was looking for new aesthetic material, and it created several new isms like serialism, spectralism, musique concrète, instrumental, minimalism, and so on. And the idea was that by creating such isms and styles, you created a new aesthetic experience on the basis of new aesthetic materials. That's why we can call this paradigm the paradigm of material aesthetics. But this paradigm of material progress has been exhausted for some time. There is an alternative possible, and the alternative to redefine the notion of newness. So newness cannot only be defined by new material, but also by new Gehalt, by new content. And nowadays, the newness of an artwork is created usually by new content and new Gehalt. I call this paradigm shift, which happens sooner or later in all the arts, a gehalt-aesthetic term. And conceptual art and conceptual music are the turning points here. They work like a catalyst for this paradigm shift. In art music, this shift happened only recently, and the main reason for that is that new music worked with acoustic instrument and was highly institutionalized, and that's why it was bound to an idea of absolute music, of pure instrumental music. And with the digital revolution, you have now, with the composers have an interface where they can mix sound with video and with text very easily and create a new type of music. And I call this, in contrast to absolute music, relational music, because here you have the relation to what is usually called the extra musical material is part of the composition and part of the notion of music. This paradigm shift took place in the realm of high culture, or reflexive culture, one can say, and a reflexive culture relies on discourse and text production. Contemporary classical music was not affected by a discourse, and it was not affected by the end of material progress, because it was part of the classic music tradition. But if it becomes more and more easy to compose huge orchestral pieces by deep learning systems like IVA, then even the composers of contemporary classical music will be forced to add something to their compositions that the AI composer cannot do. And the solution to that problem is the same solution like it happened in new music. It is a gehalt-aesthetic turn now in contemporary classical music. The composers will not any longer write only absolute music, but will try to create an additional layer of meaning by video or text or by a performance. And in this sense, AI aesthetics is pushing art and music once again into gehalt-aesthetic. Thank you.